Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
May I call Stephen Parker, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and
affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Parker. My name is Jason Beer, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Stephen Paul Parker.
Thank you very much for coming to the inquiry to assist us today, and thank you also for the provision of a witness statement. Can we look at that to start with, please? It's dated the 27th of March of this year, and if you turn to page 38 of it, you should see a signature.
I do, and that's mine.
Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. For the purpose of the transcript, there's no need to display it. That statement is WITN 00680100. Mr. Parker, I'm only going to ask you questions today about the issues that arise in what we call phase 3 of the inquiry. We may ask you to return at a later stage in the inquiry to answer questions about phase 5 of the inquiry, and in particular the role that you took and the evidence that you gave in the GLO trial, the Bates trial, including the making of 3 witness statements on the 16th of November 2018, the 29th of January 2019, and the 28th of February 2019, and then when you gave oral evidence before Mr. Justice Fraser on the 11th of April 2019. I'm going to be asking you some questions today about some individual cases which are going to be considered in phase 4 of the inquiry, because it's not currently our intention that you should come along and give evidence in phase 4. Do you understand?
I do.
Thank you. Just as a general question, however, those 3 witness statements that I mentioned, the November 2018, the January 19 and the February 19 witness statements, when you were making your current witness statement, did you have them in front of you when you were making it?
I did, and I cribbed some of the wording to save rewriting it.
Okay. And when you say cribbed, do you mean sort of cut and paste it?
Not exactly cut and paste, cut minor changes. Yeah.
Okay. And did you write stuff afresh?
Oh, yes. Most of it was. I mean, we're probably only talking about 1 or 2 minor paragraphs that were actually copied.
I understand. Can we start, please, with your career and qualifications? You tell us in your witness statement that you left school at 16, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Do you have any professional qualifications that,
no.
that are relevant to what we're going to speak about today?
No.
And I think you moved to ICL, as it was then called, in 1985, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you stayed there until you retired in December 2019. It had changed name in the meantime. So you worked for the company. You were a company man for some 34 years, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
You tell us in your witness statement that in that time you received what you describe as industry-specific technical and skills training. Can you, in broad terms, tell us what you mean by that?
It was generally training on particular programming languages or methodologies, some people skills training for team leading and management purposes, just general IT industry training.
And was it externally provided or in-house or a bit of both?
A bit of both.
Can we look at the roles in general terms that you performed when you moved to the SSC? And I think you were there for 22 years by my calculations,
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Can we look at a couple of documents alongside each other, please? I think we can do this. They'll come up on the screen for you. To start with, can we look at your inquiry witness statement, please, at page 2? And then, and it's really paragraphs 4 and 5 that I'm interested in there. Thank you. And then at the same time, can we look at FUJ 308 2231? Yes, it works, good. And can we look at page 2 of that witness statement, please? And in particular, paragraph 7. So on the left-hand side, you've got your High Court witness statement. On the right-hand side, you've got the inquiry witness statement. You understand?
I do indeed.
And you'll see that paragraph 4 of the inquiry witness statement on the right-hand side is, give or take a few words, the same as the first sentence in paragraph 7 of your High Court witness statement.
Yes, indeed.
I began working in July 97. I began working in July 97. Yes?
Yes.
And then if you look at paragraph 5 of the witness statement on the right-hand side, your inquiry witness statement, the one beginning my technical role,
Yes.
and compare it to the rest of paragraph 7 on the left-hand side.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you see any difference?
Going to probably need to point out to me the difference you're interested in.
Well, just look at the witness statement on the left-hand side. You say,
Okay.
within this role, this is the third line, within this role, I was the lead designer and part of the development team.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
And then on the right-hand side, paragraph 5, you say, within this role, I also developed some of the support tools used by the SSC and was for a few years
Yes.
the lead designer and
Yes.
part of the development team. So it's,
Yes.
it's that. The insertion of the I was for a few years rather than I was the lead designer.
Yes, I understand where you are here. I couldn't remember exactly how long I was the lead designer for, and the development of things like the SSC Lab website were a cooperative effort. I took over that role in order to sort out some problems we had with the website, and carried on in that role for a period of time. But my role in that gradually diminished as other people started to take over some of the website development. It's difficult for me to quantify for you the exact periods when I was leading it and when I was just contributing to it.
So my question is, why has I was the lead designer and part of the development team become I was for a few years the lead designer and part of the development team?
I had no particular reason for that. It was just the way I was writing it in the second and witness statement.
If you had the witness statement in front of you, the High Court witness statement in front of you, which seems to be
Yeah.
the case from what you said
Yes.
earlier, and certainly for these paragraphs,
Yes.
because of the materially the same language, what motivated you to insert the phrase for a few years?
I think because I didn't want to give the impression that that was all I did for a long period. I sort of wanted to just clarify that slightly.
What would you say to the suggestion that to the High Court you were seeking to emphasise or maximise the extent, importance and duration of your role, whereas to the inquiry you're seeking to reduce or to minimise it?
That wasn't on my mind when I made that change.
And so was it that you remembered after 2019 that it was only for a few years that you were the lead designer?
That's fair, yes.
Can we take the left-hand witness statement down and just look at paragraph 7 of the right-hand witness statement, please. If we scroll down a little bit, thank you. You say between December 2009 and March 2010, I was a full-time problem manager stroke operational manager of the SSE, responsible for the management of incidents through the whole support process. That wasn't the ultimate head of the SSE, is that right?
That's correct.
Who was the, at this time, December 09 to March 10, the head of the SSE, the manager?
Tony Little.
So had Mr. Peach left by then?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly when Mr. Peach left, but I mean, effectively, when Tony Little took over, I acted in the problem stroke incident management role for him while he was trying to concentrate on like other parts of the SSC.
And was Mr. Little previously a member of the SSC?
No, he wasn't.
Where was he brought in from?
It was another part of Fujitsu. I can't remember now exactly what his previous job title was.
And was this always an interim role until the appointment of the manager of the SSC had been made?
No, I don't believe it was. I believe I don't know the intention behind whoever brought Tony in, but there was nothing originally which suggested it was of a short-term nature.
In the event it did turn out to be of a short-term nature,
Yes,
because
indeed.
in March 2010 you took over as manager of the SSC.
Correct, yes.
We can see that if we just scroll down to paragraph 8, please. In March 2010 I became the manager, yes?
Yes, indeed.
And you remained in that position as manager of the SSE from March 2010 until you retired in December 2019.
That's correct, yes.
Yes, we can take that witness statement down. You tell us in your evidence that your first working contact with what became Horizon, it was then known as Pathway, was way back in July 1997, is that right?
87? No.
97.
Yes.
Did I say 87?
I believe so, but it was 97.
97, thank you. Then you were working as a support consultant in the SSC.
Yes, that's correct.
And were you providing first-line support then?
No, that was third line support.
That was still third line, okay. So you were inside what became Fujitsu from almost the very start of the Horizon project?
Indeed, yes.
To whom were you providing third-line support from July 97 until the end of rollout in 2000?
Sorry, do you mean... I mean that we were providing support for the Horizon service to the post office.
And so there was no other project in which you were engaged? You were full-time on that?
Yes.
In that time, what's your recollection of the nature and extent of the faults that were reported to you?
Very little, to be honest, after all these years. I couldn't relate to you any particular faults. I would say it was a busy job, which is, I would expect to have been normal for the rollout of a new system.
Can you recall whether the, I'm going to call it birth of Horizon, was particularly problematic or regarded as particularly problematic within Fujitsu?
I don't remember anybody using terms like that, no.
So it was just another IT system, no greater or fewer faults than might be expected?
Correct, yes.
Can we look, please, at WITN 0460 0100? WITN 04600104. Thank you. No, that's the wrong reference. WITN 04600104. Thank you. You'll see that this document is entitled Schedule of Corrective Actions for the CSR Plus Development Audit. Does that description of the CSR Plus Development audit ring any bells with you now?
I remember the term CSR Plus, but not the development audit, no.
Now, if we just scroll down, we can see the distribution list and we can see that you're not on it. And I'm not going to suggest that you saw or reviewed this document at the time. If we just look at the abstract at the top of the page, it describes accurately what the document is. The document presents the observations and recommendations resulting from the referenced internal audit, along with the agreed corrective action, the action owner, and the date by which the action is to be complete. A status field is included for quick reference purposes. And can we look at page 9, please, of the document? The document's presented in this sort of spreadsheet format, and there are a series of issues which are called reported observations and then a recommendation for each of them. And then in the right-hand column, what has been agreed in terms of the action to be taken and a commentary on that. And can we just look at the reference against 4.2.1? And it reads, the audit identified that EPOS continues to be unstable. Pinnacle evidence illustrated the numbers of pinnacles raised since the 1998 task force and the rate of their being raised. The EPOS solutions report, then there's a reference back to it, made specific recommendations to consider the redesign and rewrite of EPOS in part or in whole to address the then known shortcomings. In the light of the continued evidence of poor product quality, these recommendations should be reconsidered. Thinking back to that 3-year or so period that you were working in the SSE whilst Horizon was being rolled out, essentially, tested and rolled out between July 97 and, say, mid-2000, did you know that there had been an audit that had identified that the EPOS system was unstable?
I don't remember now being aware of that. I would have thought I would have heard something, quite honestly, but it's not in my memory.
Is that because you would have thought you would have heard something because the correct functioning of EPOS is essential to the correct functioning of the system as a whole?
Yes, yes.
EPOS is absolutely fundamental to this system.
Indeed.
Again, can you remember whether you knew that an EPOS report had recommended consideration of a redesign and rewrite of EPOS, either in whole or in part?
I have no specific memory of that.
That would be quite a big issue, wouldn't it?
I would agree that would be a big issue, yes.
A total rewrite of EPOS.
Would be a considerable amount of work, yes.
Did you know by May 2000, i.e. the date of this report, so we're well into rollout now, that the recommendation was that the earlier task force report and its recommendations to rewrite in whole or in part should be reconsidered?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
If we go over to page 10, please. and look at the bottom right-hand box, the one dated the 10th of May, I think. Following response received from NJBC, as discussed, this should be closed. Effectively, as a management team, we have accepted the ongoing cost of maintenance rather than the cost of a rewrite. Rewrites of the product will only be considered if we need to reopen the code to introduce significant changes in functionality. We will continue to monitor the code quality based on product defects as we progress through the final passes of testing and the introduction of the modified CI4 code set into live usage in the network. PJ can make sure this is specifically covered in our reviews of BNTC test cycles. Closed. Did you know that the quality of the EPOS code, based on what were described as product defects, was supposed to remain under review during the introduction of the modified code set into live usage in the network?
I can't remember that, no.
We heard last week from Mrs. Anne Chambers. She told the inquiry that she would have expected this monitoring to have been done by the leaders of the SSC team. You were, I think, the deputy team leader in the months that we're looking at here, May 2000. Did you know that a monitoring exercise should be undertaken?
I don't remember a monitoring exercise, but I would have expected that to have been done just as much by the service managers, development team and the SSC. So I wouldn't have thought it was just purely an SSC function.
You said you gave three people there.
I did.
Three bits of the organisation that you would expect to do the monitoring.
Yes.
One of whom was SSC.
Correct.
Starting with SSC, can you remember whether in fact any such monitoring of product defects with the EPOS code?
I don't remember that monitoring being done.
Right. The other two, I think you said service managers.
Service managers, yes, and also development.
Just dealing with the service managers, who are you referring to in your description of service managers?
There is a service management team who each manage particular aspects of, or each managed particular aspects of the service. So whether it was like data center service or counter service or whichever, there would be specific service managers for those areas.
And so which of those would you, if this recommendation was to, or this decision was to be carried into effect, to have been doing the monitoring?
I would have thought if there was a major recommendation like that, they would have probably just picked a specific person and asked them to get on with it. I can't remember which part, what the official name was of the service manager who would look after the counter aspects of the service.
And you mentioned the development team, that they would or might also have a role in carrying a decision like this into effect.
Yes.
Why would they have a role in carrying a decision like this into effect?
Because they would be seeing the incidents being forwarded to them from the SSC. They would also see the actual incidents coming into them from the test teams looking at testing the actual like EPOS code.
Wouldn't the obvious repository for a decision like this to be carried into effect be the SSC?
I wouldn't have said so, no.
And why not?
Because a particular project like that would probably require a separate person to actually concentrate on that rather than the ongoing incident load on the support chain.
But could not a decision like this be carried into effect by saying to everyone in the SSC, if you see a defect, or if you have a defect reported to you that may be concerned with, or an investigation is concerned with, the EPOS code, log it, pass it to the deputy manager, to you, or by now, you, the manager?
That would be one way of approaching it, yes. I don't remember that being done in this case.
Can you remember anything at all about any ongoing monitoring by any person at all within Fujitsu of defects in the code for the EPOS?
At any time or at this time?
At this time, and I don't know, for 6 months, a year, or two afterwards?
I don't remember that, no.
You see, Mr. Parker, there's been a task force set up into EPOS in 1998, which recommend a total or partial rewrite of the system. This review in May 2000 said you should reconsider Fujitsu that recommendation, and the decision was, don't do that, we're going to do it through ongoing monitoring. I'm trying to find out who was doing the ongoing monitoring.
Understand. I can't remember. No, I am sorry. I just can't help you with that. I don't remember that going on.
Would you agree that a fundamental problem with the functionality of the EPOS code is something that should have been monitored?
Yes, I would, yes.
Okay, can we turn then to that can come down, thank you, the lines of support that were available, and just to get these out there on the transcript. You tell us on page 4 of your inquiry witness statement, from paragraph 13 onwards, about each of the 4 lines of support. And you start at paragraph 13 with first line support, and just trying to summarize this rather than reading it through. Is it right that essentially for first line support, there were 3 elements to it, 2 supplied by Fujitsu and 1 supplied by the post office itself?
Yes. I say cautiously yes, because I've realised since that I have omitted one of the teams from that paragraph 13, which was the Incident Management Team, IMT, which was also within the HSD.
Okay. Is that a subset of the HSD?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So, so far as the Fujitsu side of the house is concerned, there were 2 elements. The Horizon Service Desk, the HSD.
Yes.
That's sometimes called the Horizon System Desk, or HSH, yes?
It had various names, yes.
And sometimes the Horizon Incident Team.
Yes, I believe that was the same as HSD, yes.
And then the subset of it that you just mentioned was?
The IMT, the Incident Management Team.
And what did the Incident Management Team do?
I have trouble now remembering their exact function. I just remember the name.
And then the second element provided by Fujitsu was the Communications Management Team. You describe it as in paragraph 13.
Yes, correct.
Sorry, you describe it in paragraph 13 as the Communications Monitoring Team.
Yes.
Is that a typo? Should that be Communications Management Team?
It was probably my memory rather than a typo with these sorts of acronyms. Occasionally, the actual meaning of it gets lost in time.
Well, the only reason I ask is if we just go on to paragraph 15. You describe it there as the Communications Management Team.
Right.
And every other document I can find calls it Communications Management rather than monitoring.
In which case, it should be Management Team, yes.
Okay. And then so far as the post office side of the house was concerned, it was the MBSC, yes?
Yes.
You describe it back in paragraph 13 as the National Business Support Centre.
Yes.
Again, other documents describe it as the Network Business Support Centre. Can you recall, or
I suspect suspect now the latter is probably the accurate one.
okay, thank you. And then dealing with those three elements of first line support, then Horizon Service Desk, Communications Management Team, both Fujitsu, and then the MBSC Post Office. How would a sub-postmaster know which of those three elements of first line support he or she should contact if they've got an issue?
I don't know what information was given to sub-postmasters in terms of where to call. I would have expected them to have been given one number and then being onwardly routed, but I don't know what the guidance was and given to them.
And so if they had a discrepancy, a failure to balance, for example, which of those three would you expect them to either contact or be routed to?
NBSC, initially.
And why MBSC initially?
Depending upon whether it was a business issue or a suspected problem with Horizon.
How would a sub-postmaster know whether their discrepancy was a business issue?
They wouldn't.
How would they know who to call then?
Well, I can only go back to saying I don't know how they were told to call in, but I would have expected them to have a single point of contact, which then they talk to, and then it would be onwardly routed appropriately.
Did you know anything about that routing? How that person would decide whether this was a business issue or a software issue?
No, I didn't.
Or a hardware issue?
No.
Did you ever form an impression of how technically knowledgeable the average sub-postmaster, assistant or Crown Office employee in the post office was?
No, I didn't. My only thought on that would be like any population that's going to actually vary wildly.
So fairly representative of the population at large?
I would have thought so, yes.
Many of the sub-postmasters who have given evidence to the chair in phase one of this inquiry last year said that when they were speaking to the help desk staff, they appeared to be using scripts when they spoke to them. Were you aware of that practice, the use of a script by the help desk?
I was aware of that practice. I didn't ever get involved in writing of such scripts, and it's a fairly common process within help desks to have a script of some sort.
Did you ever see any of the scripts that the help desk was reading out down the phone?
Don't remember seeing any of it.
Can you remember, with that in mind at all, whether what the content of the scripts was, how they worked?
Only to the extent that I would occasionally see in incidents which came to the SSC a clear series of questions and answers in that incident text, and I assumed those would come from that kind of a process.
So it would say, ask question A, if answer is A1, then ask this.
Not to that extent, but I would see you would see a series of ask this, answer that within the text.
Who was responsible within Fujitsu for producing the scripts, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I would expect it to be some of the senior technicians within the HSD.
So, i.e., the HSD produced its own scripts for itself?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Was there any SSC involvement in looking at amending or approving the HSD scripts?
I can't say we never saw one, but there was certainly no such process. It would be a rarity for us to see and comment on such scripts.
And so you were seeing them almost by chance because a bit of them had been, or the answers to a bit of them had been cut and pasted into a peak.
Correct, yes.
In your time in the SSC, did the SSC ever draw up the scripts for HSD? So that, for example, they ensured accuracy that was in line with the SSC's current understanding of an issue?
I don't recall those, no.
Were the scripts paper-based, to your knowledge, or on a computer system?
I don't know.
Where would the scripts, to your knowledge, be held, i.e. within which department within Fujitsu?
Within the help desk within HSD.
What was the system that HSD, or systems that HSD used to go about its business?
They would have a call logging system, which was, in the early days, PowerHelp, in the latter days, TFS.
Just dealing with those in turn, PowerHelp,
Yes,
you described it as a call logging system.
yes.
To your knowledge, would that contain any scripts which HSD staff were asked or required to read out?
It would be a logical place to put them, but I don't know.
And TFS, does the same answer apply to that?
It does, yes.
You were telling me about the systems that were in place. Though those were the first level, a call logging system. What other HSD systems were there?
They would have access to the SSC's KEL system. I remember at some point in the process, they also had their own knowledge base, and I think I've been reading recently it was called HSD1, but I only remember that through very recent reading. And they would have access to reference kits, reference counters in order to try out scenarios.
And so dealing with those in turn, on what system were the KELs kept so far as HSD was concerned?
HSD had access to the SSC KEL, which I believe they used because I saw queries going through it.
Did they have read-only access to it?
No, they were able to generate KELs, although the SSC would approve them and check the content.
Did the KELs contain any script? The KEL system contain any scripts?
I don't remember it doing so unless the HSH generated one. I don't remember seeing scripts in the KEL.
To what extent did you have access to their systems, like PowerHelp?
We were able to examine PowerHelp in order to see what had been logged in there, because not all information came over the interface between PowerHelp and Peak. I think I probably used that a couple of times, quite rarely. That's about what I remember about PowerHelp.
Did HSD have access to Pinnacles and Peaks?
I think they did, yes.
Were there any scripts kept on Pinnacles and Peaks?
Not for the purposes of help desk support, no. I say it that way because Peak was also used in latter years in order to create sequences for software delivery and release management type purposes. So you would see sequences of actions, but they were not to do with the first line help desk.
If I, as an investigator now, wanted to find scripts within Fujitsu, where should I look?
I think my first port of call would have been PowerHelp, but I'm aware that the PowerHelp system is no longer in existence.
Where else might you look? Or might I look?
I would only be going back to people who worked at the HSD at the time to ask where they were actually kept, because, as I say, I'm not sure. I would expect PowerHelp, but I'm not sure.
You mentioned that they had their own knowledge base. To your knowledge, were any scripts kept within that knowledge base?
I don't know.
Did you within the SSC have access to HSD's knowledge base?
I don't think we did, no.
Looking at other functions of the HSD, did the HSD, have any form of remote access, however one might define that term?
No, the HSD had no remote access.
Turning to the second element of the Fujitsu first line support provision, the communications management team, what did it do?
As I remember, the communications management team were more concerned with network issues, computer network issues.
What do you mean by that, computer network issues?
Communication between computers within each outlet, between those outlets and the data centers.
Where was it based?
Stevenage.
And how many people worked in the communications management team?
I don't know.
Did the communications management team, have any form of remote access, however one might define that term?
No.
Can we turn to the third element, the element provided by the Post Office, the MBSC? Where was the MBSC based?
I'm not sure. I think it was Chesterfield, but I'm not sure.
How would the HSD communicate with the MBSC?
My assumption would be via, I was going to say via phone calls, but no, I don't know. I don't know what the linkage was there.
How would the SSC communicate with the MBSC?
Generally via the HSD.
So you would route it back down from third to first line support, expect Fujitsu's first line support to link into MBSC?
To then liaise with the NBSC, yes.
Did it, to your knowledge, the MBSC, have any form of remote access?
I don't believe so, but I never had a lot to do with, I don't think I ever had anything to do with that environment.
Can we turn then to second line support and go forward to paragraph 17 of your witness statement, please? Thank you. You tell us that second line support was provided by the System Management Centre, the SMC, and you describe non-exhaustively a list of its responsibilities. Where was the System Management Centre based?
Also Stevenage.
Did the System Management Centre, have any form of remote access, however so defined?
Yes, they did.
What was the
via-
extent of it?
I can't remember all of the things they were able to do, but it was, as I mentioned, I think in my witness statement, it was via Tivoli scripts, as they were called, which would perform particular actions on parts of the Horizon system.
And what was, in general terms, the purpose of the SMC performing those functions via Tivoli?
Just general support of the Horizon service.
What do you mean by general support? What were they? What was their access, and what were they doing that you didn't do in third line?
The nature of the scripts they had was to perform very tightly controlled specific actions, and I can't remember a great deal of them. I can't really give you a list of those things.
Can we turn to third line support then, the SSC itself? That witness statement can come down, thank you. Can we look at a document, please? FUJ 0012 0446. This is the ICL Pathway CS Support Services Operations Manual version 2. Can you see that from the top?
Okay.
It's dated, we can see the 29th of January 2001, and we can see a description of the document in its abstract. This is the top-level procedures document describing the activities carried out by the Support Services Unit within ICL Pathway Customer Service. Just on that description of Support Services Unit, what did that refer to? Is that the SSC, or is it something greater than that?
I can't. I mean, I don't remember the SSC ever being described that way. But given that it's CS support services, and Peter Burden wrote it, it could be describing any of the units, SSC, MSC, etc.
Okay, so it's a group of
I would
support,
assume so. Yes.
including the SSC.
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would assume so. Yes.
And I think we can see at the foot of the page the distribution list. It was distributed to the SSC manager, which by this time, January 2001, would have been you.
Not in 2001. No, that would have been Mick Peach.
No, I'm so sorry, Mr. Peach still,
Yes,
and you were his deputy.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Can we go to page 8, please, and paragraph 4.1. If we just scroll up a little bit so we can see the heading, a little bit more. System Support Centre. This section of the manual describes the operations and responsibilities of the SSC, and you'll see under the overview, it sets out an overview of the tasks of the SSC, covering the responsibilities of the SSC, both to the lower and upper levels of support. Can you see that?
Okay.
And then if we scroll down, please, to 4.1.1. It lists the responsibilities of the SSC to the first and second line limbs of support, i.e. looking downwards. And you'll see from number 5 that one of the SSC's responsibilities was to ensure that the incident is resolved within the total time allowed by the contract between the customer and Pathway. So that means ensure the incident is resolved within the total time allowed by the contract between the Post Office and Fujitsu.
Yes, that's right.
Were there any SLAs, service level agreements, that you were aware of that set out the total time allowed by the contract for the resolution of incidents?
There were targets for the resolution of incidents. I don't remember there ever being any SLAs.
And where were the targets recorded?
I remember there being documents with them in, but I couldn't point you to them immediately.
So even if there wasn't an SLA, there were nonetheless targets which placed the responsibility on the SSC to make sure that Fujitsu's contractual obligations to the Post Office were met in terms of timeliness.
In terms of timeliness, yes.
And that responsibility included responsibility on the SSC to ensure that first and second line support met such targets too, did it?
I don't remember a particular text on that, but I mean, certainly the SSC would assist first line, second line to ensure that they could resolve their incidents, yes.
Was the meeting of those targets an important driver to the work of the SSC?
I wouldn't describe it as an important driver. I would describe it as a means of measuring the effectiveness of the SSC, yes.
And how was it monitored?
Mick Peach actually produced statistics on the SSC's processing of incidents and reported them back via various means, including a web-based portal.
Reported them to whom?
It would have been reported to both. Well, it would have been reported initially into the Fujitsu structure. So the service managers and Mick's immediate superior and the development teams, etc. I mean, it was a generally available measure within Fujitsu.
And when you took over in 2010, did you do that?
By 2010, we were relying more on the automatic generation of that information via Peak.
Were you aware of contractual penalties for failure to meet such targets?
Not targets on general incidents through the SSC. There were SLAs on other parts of the service, which the SSC would be involved in processing incidents for.
Were you aware of contractual penalties concerning those?
Yes, I was.
Did they have an important impact on the work of the SSC?
They had an impact on the work of the SSC in determining priorities applied to the workload as it came in, yes.
Was there a desire to close incidents in order to meet such targets? No. I mean, we would want to close incidents when we get to the root cause, not just in order to fulfil timescales. If we go over the page, please, to subparagraph 7. Thank you. One of the responsibilities of the SSC at 7 was to create and maintain a register of known deficiencies within the pathway system and the solution to these problems where known. And at 8, the SSE was to allow HSH, which we've been calling HSD, and the SMC access to this register so they can fulfill their function of filtering out known errors. Was that obligation essentially fulfilled through KEL?
Yes.
How were HSH required to use the KEL system to filter out known errors?
Don't quite understand the question. I mean,
Yes. How would first line support use KEL to filter out known errors?
in the same way that third line support would use the actual KEL by specifying keyword searches to retrieve relevant KELs.
And so, but when you retrieve the relevant KEL, how was it used to filter out known errors, as this document describes it?
By examining the text in there, matching it to the symptoms that were presented in the incident, and making a technical decision whether or not it was the same problem.
In what respect is that filtering out known errors?
It's filtering out known errors in that it wouldn't be necessary then for the HSH to forward that incident upwards through the support chain. They would recognise that that incident is already known about, there is already a solution to it, and hence they wouldn't need to actually forward it on.
Was there, over time, a tendency by first line support to escalate issues to the SSC inappropriately when in fact there was a fix in a KEL?
That sort of thing always happens to some degree. I wouldn't describe the HSD's forwarding as being any worse or better than like anything else. I mean, you always get some instances whereby a previous level of support will miss a known error and fail to filter it.
Was there any pressure placed by the SSC on first line support not to escalate issues by reference to the KELs?
There would be meetings where we would occasionally discuss particular issues and assist the HSH in fulfilling their filtering responsibilities. There would be that would be an ongoing process.
If we go down the page, please, to the SSC's responsibilities to fourth line support. It says the responsibilities of the SSC to fourth line support, so looking upwards, are, and then it sets them out over 13 sub-paragraphs. Paragraph 2 places an obligation on the SSC to filter out all calls for which the problem is already known to the support community and for which a solution is already known or is being generated. This includes problems for which the SSC knows a resolution but has not yet incorporated the resolution into the KEL. Is that right?
Yes, that is right.
And at 3, there was a responsibility to retain duplicate incidents in the Pinnacle systems and ensure that when the resolved incident is received by the SSE, the duplicated calls are closed. Duplicate incidents are repetitions of an incident that's already been passed to fourth line support. Yes?
Yes, indeed.
And then over the page, please, at 11, the SSE is required to ensure that for any code error, a probable solution is indicated prior to passing the incident to fourth line support, and wherever possible, the proposed solution has undergone limited testing. Was the SSC under pressure to avoid passing problems up to fourth line support?
No, I mean, if we identified a new issue, then it would be passed on to the fourth line.
If a problem was resolved under existing KEL guidance, that wouldn't be passed up.
It shouldn't be, no.
If there was insufficient evidence of a system fault, that wouldn't be passed up, would it?
It shouldn't be, but I would caveat that by saying that in some cases we may want to talk to development about a fault in order to see if they could give us any help with ways to identify what the fault was.
Might that take place on an informal basis?
It would be on an informal basis, yes.
But if no fault with the system could be positively identified, that would be written up as a user error, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily user error. User error was just a categorization.
If no fault in the system could be identified, what was the code for closing the incident then? Was there a code which said no fault can be identified, but do not categorize this as a user error? The position is simply unknown.
Without referring to a document, I can't remember all of the closure categories.
If there was insufficient evidence of a fault or no evidence of a fault, would that be referred back to the sub-postmaster sometimes for more information or evidence?
Yes, it would.
What would happen if the sub-postmaster couldn't produce any more information or evidence?
If the information we had was inadequate to diagnose what the problem was, then that call would have to be closed. But that would only be done after we've exhausted any lines of inquiry.
Who would be chasing those lines of inquiry?
Occasionally, I would expect the postmaster maybe, or a problem manager.
Who, when you refer to the problem manager, who are you referring to then?
There would be, well, it's part of the problem management process, which was used within the support chains, which is that if you get multiple incidents with potentially the same root cause, then a problem manager would start to collate those and progress the problem.
Where did the problem manager sit within the 4 lines of support?
There would be the problem manager function would be within all of the service delivery units. So there would be a function for that purpose within HSH or within like other teams.
Within the SSC?
Problem management would also happen within the SSC, yes.
That's a different issue. Problem management may also happen within the SSC. That's small p, small m.
Yes, understand.
You were referring to the problem manager, which I interpreted to mean a capital P and a capital M. Was there a person within each of the 4 lines of support who was called a problem manager?
I can't be sure, because the theory is that the problem can be raised by like anybody. So there's a problem initiator within the process. I can't remember. I think the service delivery managers just also performed the function of problem manager. So, I mean, that was certainly true in my case as a service delivery manager for the SSC. I would also occasionally take on the role of a problem manager.
You're talking there about collecting or collating, bringing together into a basket a series of problems of the same or a similar nature.
Correct.
You said occasionally you would do it.
Correct, yes.
Was there a systematic or written policy that prescribed how this would be done?
Yes, there was.
And how would it be done then? You get a pinnacle that is escalated, or a peak that's escalated to SSC.
Yes.
The first one that they've seen.
Yes.
It's dealt with by SSC diagnostician number 1 on their shift. A week later, another one comes in to diagnostician 2. Another problem comes in to HSH, doesn't get escalated for one reason or another. Week 4, a problem of the same or similar nature comes into diagnostician 4. How are they all collected together in a basket? What was the system for linking them?
Within the SSC, it would be recognised by the fact a KEL's been raised with an incident reference on it, and then as further incidents come in which reflected the same KEL.
But hold on, that assumes that the problem that you're confronted with is a known error.
If it's got as far as the SSC, then we would have raised a KEL for an incident, even if we hadn't necessarily been able to get to the bottom of it.
So known error logs were raised in respect of unknown errors.
Where we could say, yes.
So were they called unknown error logs?
No.
And so what was the effect of raising an unknown error on a known error log then?
The effect would be to allow visibility of the fact this problem has happened before, the steps taken.
So in my example, week 1, diagnostician 1, gets a new error that hasn't been seen before. They create a KEL for that, do they?
After investigation, yes.
Yes. And they can't find what the fault is,
Yes,
and the incident's closed.
yes,
Week 2, somebody calls in with what is in fact the same or a similar problem. How is that linked to what happened the week before?
by virtue of searching the KEL and finding the information on there.
And how does one search a KEL, or the KEL system?
You use technical knowledge to define a series, one or more keywords which describe the problem, and then put those into the KEL system, and they may be combined with, the various terms can be combined together, that they should all be present, or just some of them present. The system would return a series of matching KELs in a priority order of how well they match the criteria, and then the diagnostician would then look and examine each one further to see if it matches the incident they are working on.
We can take the document down from the screen, thank you. We're going to hear some evidence from Mr. Peach, Mick Peach, next week, assuming he gives evidence in accordance with his witness statement that the KEL system was written primarily by you. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And so you wrote the code for it, did you?
I wrote the code for it until other people took over later on. So I think currently and certainly while I was managing the unit, John Simpkins enhanced the KEL, and it wasn't just me. I mean, other people provided parts of the development efforts for the KEL at various times.
And you mentioned essentially a search function within it.
Yes.
That would return a series of hits.
Yes.
Essentially on relevance grounds.
Yes.
Is that
yes.
right?
Yes.
Was that was what was searched the entirety of the text of the KEL, or was it the subject line or the summary line?
It was the entirety of the text.
So every single word on the KEL, there was essentially a free text search of all of those KELs.
I'll clarify that slightly. It was a free text search of the symptoms, the problems, and the solution. There were certain fields on there like release number or other specific criteria like that, which were not part of the free text search.
Was there any system of auditing or monitoring to ensure that information recorded on a KEL was accurate and enabled future free text searching to occur appropriately?
There was when the KELs were created outside the SSC, so the SSC would perform an approval function when a KEL had been written outside the SSC. Within the SSC, it would just be discussions amongst peers about, you raised this KEL, I would suggest this wording change, etc.
The inquiry's heard some evidence that not all problems that were called in were, on searching the KEL system, returned by or matched with the appropriate KEL, and that where there were KELs in place, these were not always spotted by those who are handling the pinnacles or the peaks. Did anyone ever examine how the KEL system was operating in practice?
We certainly didn't do any monitoring of how the ongoing monitoring of how the KEL system was working in practice. We would expect that if somebody found a KEL that they had a problem with, they would either change it themselves and we would approve it, or they would contact us to have a KEL changed.
Were KELs accessible to the post office?
No.
Thank you. So that would be an appropriate moment to take a break before we look at some example KELs to see the system working in practice.
All right. What time should we start again?
11:30, please.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you, sir. So good morning. Can you see and hear me?
I can indeed.
Thank you. Mr. Parker, we were going to look at some example KELs to see the system operating in practice. Can we start, please, with Fujitsu 0005 9025? Thank you. This is a KEL which advised on how to reboot and reload a counter. You can see that it was raised by Pat Carroll on the 15th of June 1999 and was last updated by you on the 28th of January 2004. And if we just look at the problem, counters are being rebooted or reloaded by switching off the base unit, and this may prejudice the integrity of the messages held on the counter, making the possibility of an altogether more serious and resource-consuming failure greater. Now, the inquiry has heard evidence so far of sub-postmasters being advised to reboot as a response to their suggestion that they think that there is a problem with the system which is causing a discrepancy in data. Was that advice that you knew was given? Just switch the system off and on again, or reboot the system?
To my mind, they are two different things. Rebooting the system, I would have expected the Control-Alt-Del method to be used because that is a tidy way of doing it. I wouldn't have expected people to just turn off and turn on base units because there are some risks inherent with any computer system if you do that.
This records counters being rebooted or reloaded by switching off the base unit. That's the wrong thing to do, is what you're saying. It says that this may prejudice the integrity of messages held on the counter. In what way might it prejudice the integrity of messages held on the counter?
Simply turning off a computer system with a spinning disk drive in it can cause failures in the disk storage.
And so essentially this KEL is saying that some sub-postmasters were rebooting in a way that would cause new problems, or could cause new problems.
Which could cause new problems, yes.
What would the, quote, altogether more serious and resource-consuming failure be?
I don't remember exactly why that sentence or that ending of the sentence is on there. My interpretation of it is you would get a symptom which was known as a CRC error, which was a disk error, which could prevent the application from working. It would, in fact, I believe, if I remember correctly, it would stop it dead.
So sort of total shutdown.
It wasn't a total shutdown, but the underlying system would just stop.
And is that the altogether more serious issue that's referred to? Do you
That's all I can assume. As I say, I don't remember the exact reason that final part of the sentence was put on there.
And so presumably, given the contents of this KEL, that message would have been passed out to all sub-postmasters who were using Horizon. Don't reboot or reload your system by switching off at the base unit. Always reboot using Control-Alt-Delete keys.
I would expect that to have happened, yes.
And how would your expectation have been carried into a reality? This KEL is sitting within the SSC saying, this is the problem, this is what happens if the sub-postmaster does the wrong thing. How would these words in the KEL get translated into a estate-wide message to sub-postmasters?
My recollection is sketchy, but I believe this particular problem was notified directly to the HSH in order to ensure they were giving out that particular advice. I'm not sure exactly how it was communicated to the post office, because that wouldn't have been something I was involved in.
Who would have been involved in it? You've got a KEL that's saying there's a problem here and there are serious consequences for sub-postmasters if they do something. What was the system to ensure that they didn't do that something?
I would expect that either the the SSC on raising the KEL would have told one of the service managers responsible for that part of the service, and that would have then been like onward communicated as appropriate to the post office, is one route. The other would be direct contact from HSH onto the post office. I would expect the former to have been more likely.
And where would we find a record of that? Because there's nothing on this KEL to suggest that that happened. Where would we find evidence?
I don't know how the service managers recorded that kind of thing.
When you say the service managers, who are you referring to there?
There were a number of service managers responsible for different parts of the Horizon service. And they were within Fujitsu. And so it would have been via one of them that information was actually relayed to post office.
And how, we've got on this Pat, Carol and you.
Yep.
How would these service managers have learned from this KEL that that's what they needed to do?
A member of the SSC, probably Mick would have gone to see them.
So Mick would, when you say gone to see them, spoken to them, emailed them, or seen them face to face?
Probably seen them face to face. They were mainly based in the same building.
What I'm trying to uncover is what was the system for communicating known faults with Horizon back to the sub-postmaster community?
We had no means to do that.
Did anyone, to your knowledge, in your 22 years in the SSE, think there's an issue with that? There's a problem with that?
If there was a serious problem, then it would go via problem managers to the post office. If it was a minor issue, then the existence of the KEL would be recognised by HSH when postmasters called in, and the guidance would be given directly to them at that time.
That's after the problem has occurred?
It is, yes.
That's no good, is it?
It is, for minor incidents, I think it is adequate. For major things, no, but it would have then gone via problem managers.
And where does this sit in your spectrum of minor to major?
And I don't remember whether the turn off a counter advice was being given by HSH. If it was being given by the help desk, then I would consider it to be a major problem.
Was there any record kept or system operated that said, we've got a problem that we've identified here in the SSC? There needs to be the following contact with the following parts of Fujitsu or the post office to ensure that the right people know to cascade a message back to sub-postmasters. We are not going to do it on this occasion because it's a minor problem. We are going to do it on this occasion because it's a major problem.
That would go via service managers.
And the service manager here is somebody in the SSC?
No, it's an external group. No, sorry, external's wrong. External to the SSC, internal to Fujitsu, group of people who had responsibility for various parts of the service.
And so to take this one as an example, which part of the system or service did this concern, and to which service manager should this have gone?
This bit of advice concerns the locator. I cannot remember which service manager that was.
And so was there a record kept in the SSC to say, we've passed this on to service manager X or service manager Y for cascading, as I've called it?
That would be potentially recorded in SSC period reporting.
What is SSC period reporting?
That is reporting generated on a monthly basis to service managers and other parts of the Horizon environment on the activities of the SSC.
So is it like a performance report?
There was performance data in there, yes.
Can we move on, please, to Fujitsu 0005 8645? You'll see that this is a KEL and appears to be concerning an early issue with a riposte bug. The KEL was raised by Bob Foster on the 4th of July 2000 and was last updated by you on the 28th of September 2000. You'll see from the problem that a person called, well, let's read it. The message relates to the riposte program's node identifier, which identifies the counter within that office, i.e. node 1 for the gateway, node 2 for counter 2, and so on. The invalid node ID event is caused by an incoming message arrived from a neighbor, and riposte detecting that node ID is invalid. The subsequent event network message received from an unknown source is likely to refer to the same message. Mark has spoken with Isha regarding this problem. Just stopping there, the Mark referred to there, would that be Mark Jarosz?
I would think so. He was generally the person who would speak directly with Isha at this time, yes.
His understanding is that isolated occurrences of this event, that is not once per message received from the correspondence server, are likely to be caused by a bug in riposte. Unfortunately, without a reproducible case, it's very difficult to progress this problem. His recommendation, would that be Mark's recommendation?
That would be my
rather than
assumption, yes.
Is that we do not pursue any attempts to reproduce this problem with riposte 5.4. That's a release, is it?
It is.
Rather, we wait to see if it still happens with riposte 6. That's another release.
It is.
The two reasons for this recommendation are, one, the connection protocol has changed significantly at riposte 6, and hence so has maintenance of connection state. Therefore, the problem may have been solved. Two, the relatively low frequency of occurrence, less than 10 per day, is mostly benign. Mark will review the provision of additional diagnostics information in riposte 6 with Isha to facilitate diagnosis of problems with connection state. So would it be right that the effect of this bug was that messages could be discarded?
I don't remember enough about it. I was never a counter specialist, so I can't really give you any good technical detail on that.
Reading or rereading the problem there, can you tell from that that one of the consequences of the bug appeared to be the discarding of messages?
I can't be sure.
Scrolling down to solution, these events indicate that a message has been discarded.
Right.
Advice from Mark Jarosz is that given the small number of messages are being discarded, we should treat this event in the same manner as the, quote, network message from an unknown source. That is relatively benign, but we need to solve it should it be seen at riposte 6. So looking at that, it would seem that the effect of the bug was the discarding of messages, yes?
That's what it says, indeed.
It's described as relatively benign. Do you know what that means?
I can only assume that my assumption from that would be that because of the that some messages are just not important to the operation of the system. So therefore some of them being discarded may be like relatively benign. I can't really help you like any more than that.
The evidence section at the foot of the page, none required for CI3 counters. Should this occur in a data center or CI4 counter, then please raise a call with the SSE and obtain event logs from the system reporting the error. So is that saying only raise calls in the case of CI4 counters?
It is, yes.
What would happen to the CI3 counters then?
Then the inference here is that no calls would be forwarded to us for seeing the same thing on a CI3 counter.
So it's telling the lower levels of support for CI3 counters, don't send them to us.
Yes.
Why was that?
From the previous advice from Mark that it's relatively benign. It's likely to be fixed, or at least the nature of it changed in the next version of riposte being delivered. I have no way of knowing the proximity of that delivery. If it was going to happen that week, then probably you're just not going to see a great deal of issues. If that release is not being delivered for 6 months, then it would be I think it would be something which you would see more issues from.
So essentially a wait and see approach was being taken. This was essentially a problem for Isha. Let's see whether their release fixes it.
That's my reading of it, yes.
Was the SSE and Fujitsu more generally significantly reliant on Isha?
For the riposte messaging part of the service, yes.
And was the riposte messaging service a critical element of the system?
Yes.
Was that a source of frustration?
No, I wouldn't describe it that way. Any issues that needed to be communicated to Escher would go via Mark to Escher, and we would get answers back. So I wouldn't describe it as something which was particularly frustrating.
Did it limit the ability of the SSE to understand the root causes of any bugs, because such knowledge was vested in Isha?
No, Esher, yes, sorry, Esher would give us information when requested. They gave us training when requested. They were just another supplier into the Horizon service, really.
So were they, to your understanding, an open and transparent subcontractor?
I didn't have enough dealings with them to make that judgment.
Were, to your knowledge, in the 22 years that you worked in the SC, there ever any problems with Esher, or was it a smooth and a harmonious relationship?
I can't remember any particular issues.
That can come down, thank you. The inquiry heard evidence last week from Mrs. Anne Chambers that a problem with the KEL system was that service tickets would be passed to the SSC with the wrong KEL quoted on them. Was that a problem of which you were aware?
Yes.
Was this escalated as a difficulty within Fujitsu?
It wasn't escalated as a difficulty within Fujitsu, but I mean it would be the subject of discussion between the SSC and the HSH, both to point out to them where they may have found an incorrect KEL, and or for us to improve KELs to ensure that they were much easier for HSH to find.
So what was done to rectify the problem with the use of the KEL system then?
It was an ongoing process of discussion between the various lines of support.
Ongoing until you retired?
At various times, yes, I think that was probably true.
Did that indicate to you that there was a structural or a systemic problem here?
No.
Why not?
Because
the same problem comes up for 22 years.
It's the same category of problem. It is not the same problem. I mean, the interpretation of the information on a KEL is down to the person reading it. If we found a situation where that interpretation was consistently wrong, we would fix it. We would change the KEL to ensure that it was better understood by other support units.
That assumes that the problem lies with the content of the KEL.
It does, correct, yeah.
Was that always the problem? The way that the SSC were writing their KELs?
No, that was not always the problem. It was also true that sometimes the HSH technician could be using search terms which were too broad or were incorrect.
Mrs. Chambers also gave evidence that the SSC at third line and development at fourth line did not always know how many branches had reported a particular problem that was the same or similar because tickets were not escalated up to the SSC. They had been stopped, intercepted at a lower level. Was that a known issue in your time at the SSC?
I wouldn't describe it as an issue. I mean, that was a function of the problem management part of the service.
So it wasn't a problem that the SSC didn't know the extent and severity of a problem because calls were not being escalated to it?
The previous level of support, or the HSH, would be recording on master calls the prevalence of the same issue being logged, and if they deemed that there was a significant problem there, then they would escalate it through the problem management process.
How would they know in HSH the extent or prevalence of an issue that was in fact a system problem that was the same or similar?
From having knowledge of the KEL, associating it with a master call, hearing the postmasters or other source of information, bringing up the same issue again.
What if all the sub-postmaster could say is that I've got an unexplained discrepancy?
That's such a wide explanation. Sorry, that's such a wide description of the symptoms that we would then have to go back to them and get them to describe it in greater detail, or rather the HSH or NBSC would.
Can we turn to paragraph 57 of your statement, please, which is on page 19. At paragraph 57, you say the second line support groups were expected to answer any incidents with their operating remit. For example, all user or known errors. They were also expected to send only one example of a suspected new software fault to third line, retaining any duplicates at second line for closure once the main incident was resolved. Why was that the system?
Because you don't want to flood third line with multiple instances of the same sort.
Even though the prevalence of the same fault would be important information for the SSE to have to ascribe seriousness or criticality.
We could obtain that in information from the line of support which was tasked with retaining that particular type of incident.
And did that happen?
Yes, it did.
You would look back to second line and say, how many incidents of this nature have you got?
Yes.
So we can ascribe a value to how important
Yes.
this is.
Yes, it would, or they would occasionally literally ring up saying, look, we've had now 75 of these things. We see it as a major issue.
And wouldn't knowing the range of ways in which a suspected new software fault had occurred be relevant information?
It may be, depending upon the type of fault being investigated, in which case we could go back to SMC, HSH and say, right, give us all of the references for duplicate calls so we can have a look through them and get extra detail from them.
How would you know whether asking for sight of the duplicates would assist you or wouldn't assist you? If you didn't have
It would depend on the nature of the problem. If we have analysed an incident and managed to get to the root cause of it, then clearly there is no usefulness in analysing further. If we have not got to the root cause of it, then it would be worthwhile to gather details of other incidents so that we could examine the evidence on them to help us get to the root cause.
If we go forwards to paragraph 69 of your statement, please, which is on page 22. If we just scroll down, please. you say when the root causes of problems were identified, the SSE would check the Horizon system for the fingerprint left by the problem and identify which outlets were impacted. Was that done in each and every case with every bug?
It would depend upon the nature of the bug. For anything, certainly for any bug with a financial impact, yes.
How would you know whether a bug did or didn't have a financial impact?
By the
In all cases?
By the root cause analysis of the bug, we would know that this does or does not have a financial impact.
This reads the first sentence of 69 as if for all cases in which a root cause was identified, the SSE would check the system to see how prevalent the fault was and how many branches it impacted. Was that only done in cases where there was an assessment that it had a financial impact?
I would probably revise that to say major problems. So something with a significant impact to service would always be traced back to determine where that impact was.
You just said something with a significant impact to service would always be traced back to determine where that impact was. The question I'm asking is, did you determine how wide an impact a fault had? How would you know how wide an impact a fault had without looking?
You wouldn't know without looking. That is true. You would, on the root cause analysis would tell you exactly which type of service would be impacted by this, by the criticality of that service. You could then understand how serious this was, and you could then go back and search and find where that impact had been seen.
Who would make the decision on whether the impact on the sub-postmaster community was significant enough or not to investigate the impact on the sub-postmaster community?
Generally, it would be a member of the SSC or a service manager.
And again, you referred to a service manager there. That would be the person that was responsible for the bit of the estate that had gone wrong.
Correct. And I would add that that I would expect that service manager to be in contact with the post office as well over that issue. I forgot to mention that in my previous comment.
Why would you expect the service manager to be the person in contact with the post office to make a decision on how wide an impact a fault had on the live estate?
Because that was one of the responsibilities of their role, to be liaison with a similarly situated representative of the post office.
Can we go back to paragraph 60, please, which is at the foot of page 20? You say the use of response codes. Can you assist us with what a response code was, please?
A response code was the numeric representation of a particular response text. So you mentioned earlier user error. That would have a particular number.
A closure code, like 4039, whatever.
Yeah.
You say the use of response codes as a measure of support effectiveness. could also lead to inappropriate response causes being used in order to be kind to or prevent contention with other lines of support. For example, advice after investigation being used in preference to no fault in product or advice and advice given. Are you saying that people in SSC used an incorrect response code in order to be generous to their colleagues in first and second line support? Have I read that right?
The use of a response code is always subjective to the person, but yes, I mean, you are right. Sometimes response codes would be used, I believe, appropriately in order to not cause contention.
And what do you mean by cause contention?
The various lines of support would, one of the measures of their service would be what volume of calls they manage to filter out and stop going to the next line of support. And a response code on a returning incident is part of that measure.
Were duplicates part of that measure, i.e. inappropriately passing up duplicates? Were they considered black marks and counted against second line support?
Yes, they were.
Can we turn to the issue of remote access and go back to Fujitsu 00120446? You remember we looked at this earlier. The operations manual dated the 29th of January 2001. Can we go to page 14, please? And look at paragraph 4.3. Under operational change. It records that the SSC has access to the live system, which can be used to correct data on the system when this has been corrupted in some way. The procedure for this is as follows. It then describes a process for authorizing a change. Yes?
Yes, it does.
And if we can display that page and the next page, please. Thank you. On the right-hand page, you see it goes up to 12. There is actually a 13th, but I don't want to display 3 pages at once. It sets out a detailed process for each stage in the process in order to make an operational change. Yes?
It does.
And one of the stages in the process is that at least 2 people must be present when making changes to the live system. Normally these are SSC staff, but can be 1 staff member and 1 person from the 4th line support unit responsible for the area in which the data change will take place, or 1 staff member and 1 OSD staff member. What's OSD?
OSD was one of the acronyms which were used for staff in Belfast who supported the server systems and the operating systems running on them.
Looking at paragraph 5. So, sorry, I missed that last answer. So it was somebody in Belfast.
That's correct, yes.
how could somebody in Belfast be present when somebody in the SSE was making a change?
They couldn't, unless they happened to be working over in the UK at the time. During the early stages of Horizon, there were a lot of people working in the UK from Belfast, setting up server systems within the building, setting up networking systems within the building, or maintaining them. So I assume that's why the author mentioned them as a possibility.
Fourth line support were in the same building, were they?
For some of the time, yes. Later, yes. Earlier, there was a period of time, I believe, when fourth line was still located in Feltham when we were located in Bracknell, but that was a relatively short period.
And what happened in practice? Was this, in fact, was the Four Eyes procedure always done with two people from SSC?
Yes, it was. The only caveat that I haven't read here is that the Four Eyes procedure was used for a change that was going to have a financial impact, which I don't remember you reading out in this document.
I don't think it does. I mean, if you look at 4.3 operational change, we've got the whole of the paragraph on the page there. Mm. And then if we go to the top of the right-hand page, it just goes straight into the procedure.
Yeah. In that case, I think that's misleading in that the Four Eyes rule, two people observing a change was for financial changes.
Whereas this describes it for any change.
Yes, which I think is a misleading.
And looking at number 5 on the right-hand page, it says the authorizer, wherever possible, produces a script to make the data change and tests the script on the SSE reference rig prior to running it on the live system. That didn't happen, did it?
It did happen, yes. It would depend on the nature of the problem and whether or not a script was appropriate.
What would determine whether a script was appropriate?
What the actions are that are being taken, whether it was possible to actually run them via a script or not.
And is that why it's written wherever possible?
I don't know. I mean, I would assume so.
The procedure then suggests that the SSC manager or SSC website controller would check e-signatures and file the OCR. Was that process honoured?
I believe so, yes.
In your time?
In my time,
was it honoured?
No. In my time as SSC manager, we had stopped the use of e-signatures because they weren't considered to be giving us any extra accountability. So we were relying on the username password type access, guaranteeing that it was the person who was entering a particular approval.
Looking at the left-hand side of the page, the introductory paragraph, the SSC has access to the live system which can be used to correct data when this has been corrupted in some way. Was this procedure used only when data had been corrupted?
No.
So that's slightly misleading too then.
I think it is, yes.
It was used for simple corrections?
Yes, it was.
Do you know why that is? This description of this use of remote access to make changes to data, it doesn't accurately reflect reality.
I don't know why the author phrased it in that way, no.
Who was Mr. Burden?
Uh,
Peter Burden.
Pete Burden was Mick Peach's manager at the time, but also the manager of other parts of what was then customer service.
Can we go to page 20, please? And look at paragraph 4.8. Which is a third of the way down. Thank you. All diagnostic staff in the SSC have access to the live system via PCs that are connected to a private local area network. Branch panels enable staff to use these PCs to access the test rigs. The build script for these PCs was written by OSD but is held in the SSC. The PC build was performed in accordance with the access control policy. Access to the PCs, from the PCs to the live estate, to the live system is controlled by Secure ID, uses firewalls in an encrypted link and conforms to the access control policy. The SSE access to the system is for two purposes: assist in diagnosis of problems on the live system, correct data which has become corrupted. In the second case, SSC staff may only correct data in response to an authorised OCR, and only then when there are two or more people present. Again, this passage suffers from those, I think, defects that you mentioned earlier.
I think so, yes.
Both of them. What system was in place to ensure that SSC staff, in fact, only access the live estate to correct data in response to an authorised OCR?
It was enforced only via process.
What does that mean?
I mean, everybody was aware that that was the requirement, and whenever an OCR was approved of that nature, then they knew that that was what they were required to do.
People are aware of the speed limit. That doesn't mean that they always abide by it, doesn't it?
I agree with you, but I am not aware of any times that members of the SSC did not abide by that rule.
How would you know if you weren't checking?
I would know by, having seen the OCR and talking to the person who actually executed it.
No, that's a different issue. That's where they have used the OCR system.
Yes.
You know that they've used the OCR system.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
I'm talking about what audit or monitoring was there to see whether people access the live estate outside of the system that's described in 13 subparagraphs here.
Do you mean access the live system in order to make a financial change?
Yes.
Okay. There were certain audit points in place which should log most cases where that may happen, but ultimately you are depending on the people concerned to understand the requirements and the importance of not doing it.
So you've got to trust that they follow the process.
You've got to trust that they follow the process.
Sometimes with access to systems, an employer checks whether their trust in their employees is well placed or not. Was that done?
I don't know.
In your 22 years, have you any evidence that it was done?
I remember there were various audits of the processes, procedures, and access carried out by external auditors. But that's the only thing I can actually think of.
I'm talking about not an audit of the written documents. I'm talking about an audit of whether access to the live estate to correct or change in some way financial data occurred. In your 22 years, was that ever done?
I'm not aware of how it could be done, but no, I don't recall it being done.
Well, it could be done, couldn't it? Just outside of the process that's set out here.
Oh, sorry. You're saying that could a member of the SSC make such a change without anybody's knowledge?
Yes. Answer to that, obviously yes.
The answer is yes, but I would caveat that by saying was never aware of any such thing happening, and the nature of the people within the SSC is that the chances of them being able to achieve that without somebody else realising there was something going on are almost nil.
Why?
Because you're in a peer group of experienced technicians who would recognise when something wasn't being done.
How would they see?
By traces within the system.
What traces within what system?
I can't define those exactly to you because it would depend upon the nature of the change being made.
If there was a trace left, it was therefore auditable, wasn't it?
It would be capable of being audited. I don't know because we're talking on a hypothetical thing here whether such a thing would be in the audit trail or not.
In your time, were you ever aware of there being an issue or concern over the extent of SSE's access to the live estate?
There were a number of debates about access rights that the SSC had at different times. I think it's fair to say it's fairly common that there's a issue between what the ideal security of a system is and what level of security meets the actual operational needs of that system. So this was always ongoing, and it was a amicable discussion between SSC and security people.
Were you ever told that there was a concern that SSC staff had unauditable and unrestricted access to the live estate?
I wasn't aware of anything unauditable. I mean, there was issues in the early days of Horizon with the methods used to connect to counters because they weren't adequately auditable. But that was worked upon and systems put in place by the time network banking services came in as part of Horizon.
Can we look at page 31 of your witness statement, please? And can we look at paragraph 85 on page 31? You say in the first line one would have to concede that where the SSC use riposte tools and remote access to have a positive effect on outlet information, the opposite must also be possible. What did you mean by that sentence?
What I go on to clarify in the following sentence, that if some errors were made in the replaying of message store transactions, then like issues could come out of that.
And so you're talking there about innocent errors by a diagnostician when seeking to correct a fault.
That's correct, yes.
They themselves, in fact, creating new ones,
That's correct, yes.
not malign access.
Correct.
Did the possibility of malign access ever occur to you?
The possibility occurred to me, but that was within the remit of the security staff. My concern as an SSC manager was that we should only have the level of access which was required for our work, because that protected staff as much as it protected the in-service.
Can we look back to further up the page to paragraph 84.2? You say remote counter access would be used when message store intervention required that the records being reinserted originated from the outlet counter. For context, records within the riposte message store included details of the originating, that's branch code, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And counter ID, so that's which counter within the branch.
Within the branch, yes.
Some types of records, normally transactions, could only be accepted by the system if they originated from an ID within the outlet. Do I understand from that that the SSC were in fact using branch IDs in order to make corrections?
No, they were not using branch IDs. They were potentially replaying transactions from the counter itself.
But using a branch ID in order to do so?
That was an effect of it being run on a particular counter. Those replayed transactions took on that counter's ID.
And so would the footprint that was left show only the branch user ID?
Unless a member of the SSC yes. Sorry, yes. Yeah.
And so anyone looking back afterwards would not be able to see that this correction or this access was by somebody from the SSC?
Unless the member of the SSC ensured that there was an identifier within the messages going back which indicated SSC activity, which was also part of our process.
But doesn't what you've written here mean that in these cases, the only visible record would be the originating branch code and counter ID? That the involvement of the SSC in the correction would not be visible?
That was not my intention when writing it. That inference could be taken, but as I've said, any change being made where the SSC had to insert data, we would attempt to mark it in such a way that it was obvious that it was done by the SSC.
When you say we would attempt to...
It was process, it wasn't policed by the system.
Okay. So it was reliant on the operator and the second pair of eyes
It was.
to use some code that left their footprint.
That's correct, yes.
Just going back, please, to Fujitsu 001 20446. And look at page 14, please. And at the foot of the page 4.3. I just want to see the bit of the process here which requires them to use an SSC code in a way that leaves a footprint so that it doesn't appear on the face of the record to have been a branch and branch counter ID. I don't think that's in 1 or 2, is it?
It's not, no.
If we just go over the page, I don't think it's in 1 to 5 there, is it?
Not that I can see, no.
And then if we look at the bottom part of the page, I don't think it's in 6 to 12, is it?
No.
And then if we go over the page to 13, it's not in 13, is it?
No.
A policy that sets out in rather elaborate detail the process by which changes were made to the live estate, including where changes were made to financial data, ought to set out the requirement that you have just identified.
I would agree it should. I cannot explain why it doesn't, but such requirements were in other documents, and in particular in the SSC work instructions.
The SSE work instructions, i.e. that you must always use an SSC ID to leave a footprint, I'm calling it.
It must always be identifiable as an SSC change, yes.
Can we look, please, at Fujitsu 0008 8036? Remembering that the document that we were just looking at was the 29th of January 2001. We've now moved forward to the 2nd of August 2002. You can see from the title of the document and the abstract what it is. It describes the requirements and outline design for secure operational access to counters and servers. The design's based on modifying the Open SSH product to provide a command logging facility, these logs being maintained for audit purposes. And if we scroll down, please, we can see who originated the document, who contributed to it. Yes?
Indeed, yes.
And we can see at the foot of the page that Mr. Peach was an approval authority.
Yes.
And if we go over the page, please, and scroll down, we can see that you're recorded as a reviewer of it.
That's correct, yes.
And would that be accurate if it's on here that you've reviewed it? You would
Yes.
have reviewed it.
Yes, it would.
Can we go to page 9, please? And under the introduction at 1.1.1, SFS mandates the use of Tivoli Remote Console for the remote administration of data center platforms This records an auditable trail of logins to all boxes accessed by the user. It's a matter of considerable discussion and correspondence that TRC is slow and difficult to administer. This has led over time to BOC personnel, that's people in Belfast.
I assume so. I don't remember them being called BOC, but
If you go back to page 4, please. And look at the list of acronyms, Belfast Operations Centre.
Belfast Operations Centre. So yes, it would have been them. Yes.
So go back to page 9, please. I think I was up to, this has led over time to BOC personnel relying heavily on the use of unauthorised tools, predominantly our client, to remotely administer the live estate. Its use is fundamental for the checking of errors. The tool does not, however, record user access to systems, but simply records events on the remote box that the administrator access has been used. No other information is provided, including success fail, so it's not possible to simply audit failures. The use of such techniques puts pathway in contravention of contractual undertakings to the Post Office. After proposals in this system outline document have been implemented, a CP change process
Yes, that's correct.
will be raised to phase out TRC or limit its use to exceptional situations. Can you help us? What were the Belfast Operations Centre using our client for?
My assumption would be it's a method of logging on to data center servers or any other computer within the system in order to perform maintenance activities or diagnostic activities.
Why were they using this unauthorised tool?
I believe it was primarily because there was no approved and auditable tool that was operationally good enough for them to use.
Do you know why that was? Almost 2 years into the operation of this system?
I don't know.
Would you describe that as optimal or suboptimal?
Suboptimal.
The system didn't record individual user access. So did that mean that what I've called a footprint was not left?
Yes, it would.
It meant that no audit was possible.
It would, yes.
But why was it in contravention of contractual undertakings to the Post Office?
I don't remember what was in the contract about this kind of security.
But would you presume that there was some guarantee or undertaking or promise about the security of the system? That's what's being spoken of, and this unauthorised and unauditable approach was in breach of it.
That would be my reading of it, but I don't know.
Do you know whether the Post Office knew about these breaches of contract by Fujitsu?
I don't know.
Can we turn to the position with third line support, please, and look at page 13. And if we, this is under the heading requirements, subheading areas of concern, and then 4.1.2, third line support. Third line support staff receive repeat instances of calls that should have been filtered out by second line. Handling repeat calls is not an effective use of third line support resource. The current support practices were developed on a needs-must basis. Third line support diagnosticians had no alternative other than to adopt the approach taken, given the need to support the deployed Horizon solution. The consequences of limited audit and system admin access afforded to third line support staff provide the opportunity to commit fraudulent acts maliciously or inadvertently affect the stability of the new network banking and debit card online services. In addition, a complete audit would allow Pathway to defend the SSC against accusations of fraud or misuse. This is a very serious issue that's being raised here, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Why were the current support practices developed on a needs-must basis?
Because there was a necessity to support the service as it was at that time.
Why weren't they developed on a planned, designed basis?
I don't know. I was nowhere near the design of that part of the service.
Can you recall what prompted the inclusion of these paragraphs in this report? Why was it being looked at now? Was it the rollout of network banking?
I believe so, yes.
And why was the rollout of network banking a trigger or a catalyst to identify the possibility of fraudulent acts or malicious or inadvertent affecting the stability of the system?
I'm not sure. I remember it happening at that time, but I don't remember exactly why that was necessary then rather than not being done previously.
Who developed these ad hoc practices on a needs-must basis? Presumably that was you and your colleagues within the SSC.
Within the SSC or within the support environment in general.
So who developed then within the SSC these ad hoc access practices?
I don't remember.
Were you involved?
I don't believe so, no. I mean, as I say, I have no memory of that.
But it would have been known about by the then manager, would that be right?
Yes.
Mr. Pete?
Yes.
The document that we've just looked at, the January 2001 document with its 13 stages,
Oh, yes.
It might be read as saying we've got a detailed and complex process that appropriately restricts access to the live estate by SSC staff.
It might be read that way, yes.
Here, that process is being described as problematic, isn't it?
The tools being used at that time, yes.
Was this information shared with the post office, to your knowledge?
I don't know.
In your view, ought it to have been shared with the post office?
Not a decision for me to make, really. I'd go no further than that.
Can we go to page 15, please? At 4.3.2, under the heading third line and operational support, all support access to the Horizon systems is from physically secure sites. Individuals involved in the support process undergo more frequent security vetting checks. Was that true?
I believe so.
How frequent were your vetting checks?
I don't remember. I mean, I know I was initially vetted on joining Pathway, but I wouldn't necessarily know if other vetting checks had been done.
To your knowledge, were you ever re-vetted?
To my knowledge, no.
Other than the above controls, that's a secure site and more frequently vetted individuals. Other than the above controls are vested in manual procedures requiring managerial sign-off, controlling access to post office counters where update of data is required. Is that essentially describing in a sentence the 13 steps that we looked at in the 2001 document?
I believe so, but not having written it, I don't know what was on the author's mind, really.
No, I mean, that would be an unfair question to ask what was on the author's mind. But looking at it, manual procedures requiring managerial sign-off is essentially the steps that we looked at, the 13 of them,
Yes.
in the previous document.
Yes.
Otherwise, third line support has unrestricted and unaudited privileged access, system admin, to all systems, including post office counter PCs. When I asked you earlier whether you were ever made aware of a concern that SSC staff had unrestricted and unaudited privileged access to all systems, you said no. Presumably you hadn't remembered this.
Correct, yes.
Again, in the terms of level of seriousness of concern, this ranks quite highly in the spectrum, doesn't it?
It does if you have no trust in the staff, yes.
If you trust your staff, you don't need any checks at all. Is that what you're saying?
No, but the having trusted, vetted staff mitigates that problem to an extent.
You're focusing, are you not, on malicious or malign access?
I am, yes, yes.
As opposed to the leaving of a footprint for audit purposes.
Yes, that's true.
That could be examined and tested, for example, in any court proceedings.
That's true, and I would much prefer anything that the SSC had to do to be auditable, yes.
Does that reflect the reality in the SSC, that other than locks and keys on the building and what was said to be frequent or more frequent security checks, other than that, the people in third line support had unrestricted and unaudited access to all systems, including post office counter PCs?
I would certainly say that that applied to most, but there was audit for some things in place, but I can't define for you what they were. But certainly for the post office counter PCs, as specified there, that is true.
Skipping over the second bullet point, the current support practices were developed on a needs-must basis. Third-line support diagnosticians had no alternative other than to adopt the approach taken, given the need to support the deployed Horizon solution. Remembering back, did that reflect the position at the time? Look, we don't like this, but we've got no option. We need this privileged access in order to make the system work.
It does, yes.
Did anyone ask the question, did anyone not think of this when they were designing and building the system?
I don't remember such a comment, but I would expect people to think, why? I probably can't say like any more.
Did it, to your memory, consciously feel uncomfortable?
No, it didn't feel uncomfortable. You got on with the job with the tools you had.
The document continues, there are, however, no automatic controls in place to audit or restrict user access. That, in a sentence, is describing what should be in place, namely embedded automatic system controls that at the same time restrict access but also provide an audit trail afterwards.
That would be my reading, yes.
This exposes Fujitsu to the following potential risks: the opportunity for financial fraud, operational risk, errors as a result of manual actions causing loss of service to outlets, and infringements of the Data Protection Act. Was this needs must third line support access developed because of the number of bugs, errors and defects in Horizon Legacy that became apparent as it was rolled out?
No, I mean, as soon as you've got one error which needs you to access a particular component of the system, you have to find a way of accessing it.
How many members of staff were in the SSC from, say, mid-2000?
Can't remember exactly what I'd say about mid-20s.
And did that number remain static or did it grow?
It changed over time, up and down.
And there were turnovers of staff?
There were. We didn't have a massive staff turnover, but yes.
This document, in terms of operational risks, describes errors as a result of manual actions causing loss of service to outlets. That's what I described earlier as an inadvertent error rather than a malign or malicious conduct. Did Fujitsu ever explore whether this unauthorized access had destabilized the Horizon platform in any way?
I don't know.
To your knowledge, did it?
I don't remember it being done.
Can we go over the page to page 16, please? And paragraph 4.6, controlled access to sensitive data. There are three categories of sensitive data within the pathway solution. Personal data, subject to the rules of the Data Protection Act regarding its storage, confidentiality, accuracy and use. Business sensitive data, cryptographic keys and data. None of the above sensitive data should be made available outside the pathway secure environment. Due to the potential sensitivity of cryptographic keys and data, there is a further restriction that diagnostics can contain this data. Namely, it can only be reviewed by a defined group, initially the SSC third line support group and its development. Secondly, in a secure location, currently 6th floor in Bracknell and the secure room in FEL 01. Is it right that the policy document appears to be addressing the issue of access to sensitive data by limiting the access of it to those who are within a secure room in Bracknell?
Yes.
If one of the unauthorized tools, whether that's our client or one of the others, was being used by Fujitsu staff, could that only be used in the secure space at Bracknell, or could it be used elsewhere?
It could only be used within secure spaces in around Horizon. I mean, the SSC in itself had a secure floor. I believe, but I don't know, Belfast operations had similar.
Thank you. So I'm about to move to a different subtopic. I wonder would that be an appropriate moment to break until 2 o'clock?
Yes, by all means. So we'll convene again at 2 o'clock.
Thank you very much, sir.